Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi and welcome back to That Trippi Show. With Iowa in the books, we break down what it all means. Has anything changed going into New Hampshire? We also have lots of your questions to get to after we ran out of time last week. Alex, where should we get started?
Well, after you promising that we will get to questions, we will get to questions, but
No, you're the one who always promises we'll get to questions and then we never get there. And you tell me that we're going to get to them. So then I promise them and then you blame me. I got it. I understand.
I think we would feel really bad if we didn't have Sally's question this week. So we promise we'll get to it.
Okay.
All right. But first, let's start in Iowa. Joe, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I just tried that in the intro. We saw how that worked. What did you see coming out of Iowa? Are there 2 tickets out? Are there 3? Who's mad? Who's happy? What's going on?
Well, there's either 2 tickets out or no tickets out. DeSantis, I think, failed miserably, as I thought he would. I thought he was going to be worse. I thought he'd actually come in third, but it turns out, as we had talked a little bit about, that Nikki Haley had the worst last 10 or 15 days in Iowa, second worst, because the worst last 10 days, 15 days in Iowa was my guy Howard Dean in 2004. We had a miserable 10, 15 days where we dumb things happened and we, screwed ourselves up and we ended up just, losing a third of our support. I think her comments about, something similar Dean said, but she said that, New Hampshire would correct Iowa's mistake or, would correct what Iowa did, which I'm sure lost her votes. And that's before the slavery and other stuff that happened to her last 10 or 15 days. But I think that cost her a second place finish. So DeSantis is dead. He's been circling the drain forever. He's still, all Iowa did is it means he can still claim to be circling the drain, but he's dead. He didn't get a ticket out. And now the only question is, or will be, there are either 2 tickets out, Trump and Haley, or none. Trump's, it's over, because if Trump beats her in New Hampshire, then it's over. I still think that that she has a real shot. She'd have a better one if had she taken second. I mean, she was literally in the groove, but then, like a lot of candidates, once they come under that pressure and once the spotlight comes on, particularly people who've never run for president before, like Howard Dean and Nikki Haley, in the campaign, you have a campaign staff that isn't very experienced. Again, that was the case back then. Case with her, then bad things start to happen. You start to slide a little, and she was sliding when she needed to keep the momentum going. We'll see. I still think with Chris Sununu, governor of New Hampshire, being with her, and she had a pretty strong showing, particularly given that both DeSantis and Trump had stronger organizations and supposedly more people who were energized to vote for them. There was a lot of energy for her. We'll see what happens. But I think it's now all coming down to New Hampshire. The interesting thing is Sununu has already started to lower expectations, talking about how we in the Haley camp never talked about winning New Hampshire. We've always talked about a very competitive second. I hope that's got to be spin, and it's got to be expectation setting, because it won't work. If she comes in second, she's going to be dead. But it's interesting to see how everybody's reacting.
So what about the Trump side? So if final results, in case you're truly under a rock, it was, I think Trump squeaked into 51. DeSantis beat Haley by 2, 21-19 for second and third. I mean, if you're Trump right now, how are you feeling coming out of Iowa?
Look, they're spinning. All this was spin. I mean, the whole thing they were spinning going in with, the record margin was 12 points or 14 points, on the Republican side. Yeah, well, I don't recall any former president running for a second term. The closest thing we had was the former vice president, Walter Mondale, who I worked for in 1984. He won Iowa by 32 points, 49-17. This looks a lot more like that. Trump being at 50, 51 in that range, when everything's counted. I tweeted about this. I said, while the press fawns over Trump's margin, they're missing that 49% in Iowa chose someone else. And this is a party that was built in his image, that everyone has been saying he owns it. It's his party. He completely controls it. Everybody is subservient to him and serves him. And like I said, built in his image. But even Ron DeSantis voters picked Ron DeSantis over Donald Trump. I mean, that says something. I mean, I know people keep saying, well, DeSantis voters will move to Trump if DeSantis is out. I'm not sure about that. I think people in Iowa, this tells me 49% of the people in Iowa who voted in this thing were looking for someone not Donald Trump. And that's a huge number, and the other thing that was fascinating is the huge number of people who voted for DeSantis or Nikki Haley, who also actually believed, Alex, I know this could be hard for you to take, actually believe that Joe Biden is the president, duly elected president of the United States. I don't think voters had voted for DeSantis and believe that Biden is the duly elected president of the United States can be counted on by Donald Trump.
I don't think they're going to swing back.
Yeah,
no.
So we'll see.
Absolutely not.
And that gets you to New Hampshire again, where the numbers were already much lower. I mean, there Trump was running around 39%, low 40s, high 30s for support there. And she was like 7 points down, 32%, I think, to his 39 in the last poll that I remember seeing. So that's what I think we need to watch for. Is there really some crack? That we're starting to see some cracks in and weakness in Donald Trump's hold. And I think Iowa, I've always said this, Iowa and New Hampshire, people like to, look for, who's the real challenger, that kind of stuff. And that's real. That's a real thing. But I think the thing people miss is what cracks, what weaknesses in the front runner does it expose? And I think we saw some in the Iowa results, particularly, by the way, you look at cities and suburbs. Haley actually defeated Trump, by one vote, but she beat him in a, pretty important Johnson County. In the other places where there was urban and suburban vote, the margin was much worse for Trump.
Yeah.
Much closer. And then he really rolled it up in very rural red counties where, he would get literally 87% of the vote. DeSantis would get 7, she'd get 3 or something. So my point is he really racked up the rural vote, which we know he always does. But there was some real weaknesses that showed. I mean, this is weakness in a Republican caucus.
Which, by the way, in said Republican caucus, the only people that actually came out to vote were the super, super hardcore,
right.
I call them professional voters, right? But I mean, it was like 28 below. Right. I mean, it was only, Joe, it was a balmy 11 below here in Chicago, but it was 28 below in place in Iowa. Wind chill was terrible. 116,000 turned out.
Yeah, no,
which,
very
to put
low.
that into context, right, I think 2016 was a historic high. It was like 186, something like that.
Yeah, we're talking almost like, 40% less turnout. Now, the Trump folks will all, everybody in the GOP will say, well, it was the weather. And I'm sure the weather had something to do with it. I'm not saying that, but okay, you have this guy who's got 50% of the party stays with him where literally only 60% from last time even come out. And you have a whole bunch of the people who did come out. Like you said, these are the people, the diehards in the party who came out on that cold, frigid day, freezing, got out there. And large chunks, I mean, are saying, no, if it's Trump, I'm going to vote for Biden.
That is a really important point.
Yeah.
If you look at the number, so I think it ends up being like, if it was 43% of Nikki Haley voters said they'd vote for Joe Biden in the general, that's ends up being like 8% of the overall Iowa Republican electorate
right.
is peeling off.
And
that is crazy.
And there was still a fairly significant number of DeSantis voters who said the same thing. Not nearly that many, but enough that, you add those things up and it's going to be and I know Asa Hutchinson only got 0.7% of the vote, but I don't believe the people who braved their way to the Iowa caucus as party stalwarts went there, voted for Asa Hutchinson, are going to come back and vote for Donald Trump in the general. They may stay home. Even the ones who said they'll vote for Biden, I mean, the DeSantis voters who said they'd vote for Biden if DeSantis isn't the nominee. Look, I don't think they're going back to Trump. They may stay home. Some of them might vote for Biden, and the same with the Haley voters. And this gets back to what we've been saying about Trump. His ceiling is lower. It was 46 in 2016. It was 46.7 in 2020. I don't think it. I think we've all thought, as we talked about this, Alex, over many episodes, that has diminished, and this shows that it's diminished. I mean, that these Haley voters that say they're going to vote for Biden. So that means, he's circling around, I think, 44, 45, which is a number, by the way, that you see in a lot of these polls that he's at. I don't think he's going higher than that. It goes lower for him. And so that's why, again, the third parties, the no labels, the Cornel West and Jill Steins, RFK Jr., all are what Trump needs. He needs multiple candidates in the general election, just by the way, as he had in Iowa, to split the vote up and make it possible for him in the general to win with 44, 45% of the vote. That is his best strategy. That's why I think a lot of the Trump funders are behind those guys.
So you mentioned Asa Hutchinson, and the internet is blowing up over this. We've talked about Asa Hutchinson now longer on this show for the 10 seconds we've mentioned him than we have for the entirety of the show combined before. DNC tweeted something like, after he dropped out after Iowa, "This news comes as a shock to those of us who could have sworn he had already dropped out." And then everyone got really mad at that. And I still, Joe, don't quite understand why. I think the Biden's chief of staff called him to apologize. Like, what? Do you have any clue what the hell that was? Why is everyone so upset?
It's stupid politics. It's just dumb. I mean, one cheap shot for what? Okay, so you dig on Asa Hutchinson. I mean, what's that going to do? What's it do? And then Asa Hutchinson and his supporters are not exactly people. These are people we need to bring on side, not push away. This is something that a lot of people have been doing. In other words, we're so, when you throw in Asa Hutchinson with Donald Trump, you're really pushing the wrong people away. What we should be doing is embracing them. It'd been better to say he's dropped out. Join the pro-democracy, coalition. Asa, would have been a much smarter thing to do. And to thank him for making the fight. At least trying to take Trump on, but instead, it's this snarky thing, and I think that's why, by the way, a lot of people are going out of their way to call Asa Hutchinson in the party and say, hey, that was dumb, and that's why. I mean, I think if you've been around this a long time, if you've been through the presidential fight, a lot of the guys, a lot of people who've run campaigns and press who followed them looked at this, and winning elections is about addition, not subtraction. Donald Trump tends to be a subtraction artist. I mean, he will subtract anything to make what he's got crazier, and more intense. But he subtracts. The way we get to victory in November 2024 is addition. And that means adding people like Asa Hutchinson, like the Larry Hogans, if they at some point decide not to do the crazy no labels thing and understand that that's a threat to democracy and they actually want to save it, they won't help those guys get on the ballot or run on their ticket. But the more you snark at them, let's go try to make Larry Hogan run as an independent on the no labels ticket. I mean, that's what I'm saying. This is dumb. It's addition, folks, and that's why I think people thought. That's why I think it got so much blowback, particularly from people who've been involved before at the top of presidential campaigns or in party organizations and just scratch their heads. Why would we do something that dumb?
Right. All right, Joe, we got a listener question. This is from Brian in Scranton, not Scranton, Pennsylvania, but Scranton, Arkansas. Shout out to Scranton, Arkansas for being Trippy Show listeners. But he writes in, your January 5th podcast was excellent. I agree Biden and the Democrats are in much better position than one would suspect from the tenor of the mainstream media. Good, you've been listening. By the time voters make up their minds, the public will finally realize we're in an economic boon. But your podcast did not mention the one factor that is going to make this a Democratic landslide: abortion. Democrats need to make sure the topic of reproductive freedom stays in the spotlight. We have to make sure the issue stays front and center. It'll produce the heavy turnout we need to crush these clowns. If the former guy, Trump, is the Republican nominee, this could be the biggest Democratic landslide since '64. Joe, what do you think about Brian's question?
I mean, that makes tremendous sense to me. I don't see what the question is. But no, and I mean that, and I'm not being facetious. I mean, look, that's really the point here is that, one, the things that people, that the pundits and the inflation, the economy's a disaster. What I've been pushing against is that just won't be, the way it plays out. And we're seeing even more evidence of that. And why I think things will be better than they are in terms of the polling. But fundamentally, we've seen for 2 cycles now that ever since Dobbs, now that the special elections this year just have continued to show over and over again that the Dobbs decision and the extreme 6 weeks bans, the DeSantis bans, same in Texas, are really going to crush them and be a big problem. But here's the interesting thing. I want to just go back to something I forgot to say about Iowa. There was a big thing in, I think it was Politico, that talked about the way the Iowa Republican electorate had changed from 4 years ago and how Trump had changed it in terms of who turned out and who was participating. And it was like this big pound the table thing that, wow, it was 12% more voters who were over 65 years or older. So the party had gotten older in terms of the number, the age of people who had turned out had really soared among the very older cohort. The other thing that they pounded the table on was that, geez, I can't remember the number, but the party is much more men than women than it was 4 years ago in the Iowa caucuses. And I think that might have been 9 points more men. Well, there's 2 things that, when this is why I bring it back on the Dobbs decision and on the question that he asked, that Brian asked. You got an electorate, we've seen this now through the 2 cycles in the special elections, where Dobbs is really impacted and Democrats have scored well beyond Biden's margin over Trump in districts and won the special elections. And at the same time, we're seeing that, remember, cracks. What is Iowa exposing? A weakness in their nominee and the front runner,
which is not what the media is right now. We've been talking about it. It's not what the media has said at all.
This is he's weakened the party by making it older and more male than it already was, at a time when so more women. We also know. Look, there's 2 things. Older voters are dying. Younger voters are entering the system and will be voting for the first time. So they're in decline, but he's made his party more of those people. And at the same time, we know that, in every general election, women outvote men by fairly, big 3, 4, 5 point, can be a big margin. They just do. They participate more. And some of it's because men die younger too. But my point is, so in the 2 places that he's moved the party in a, quote, strong direction, it's actually weakened them in a general election. And so, that's another thing I'll be looking for, who does vote in New Hampshire. Now, you'll get more independents and more moderate-leaning people voting, particularly because there really isn't a primary on the Democratic side at all, a write-in thing for Biden. But Good point, excellent point. It wasn't the point I was trying to make on January 5th. I was trying to make the case about the economy, but it's an excellent point. You add the economy improving, the way Trump is changing the demographics of the party in the wrong direction to deal with Dobbs. And now he's talking about bringing on Elise Stefanik to be his VP. Thinks she's got it. She's a monster, he says. So I'm not sure that's the answer. A lot of people worried that he'll pick Nikki Haley. I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think that's going to happen. But maybe she's ambitious, so she might do it in the sort of just to be, to have a leg up on the 2028 election after he loses. But I don't think it's going to happen. We'll see. But I one very good point. You're right to call me out for missing that or not explaining it better. But I do think raising it right now is really good. Is an excellent time to raise it because of those numbers in terms of how Trump is changing the party in the wrong direction to take on and answer that question. I think Democrats going to be another big plus for Democrats.
Well, here's an example. Here's some hard data on why it's going in the wrong direction. Our friend John Della Volpe over at the Harvard Institute of Politics just came out with another poll. I think this was actually mid-December, so just is a little stretching it a little bit. But basically, he looked at young people and their attitudes towards basically all the issues and how likely it was going to make them to vote. And I'm just going to read you some of these. 18 to 29-year-olds, twice as likely to describe themselves as pro-choice than pro-life.
Yep.
And then over half of registered young voters say they will definitely vote next year if an abortion-related referendum is on their state ballot. I know there's several. I know Democrats are trying to get more on. And this doesn't quite get to voting, but it's those numbers under the hood, Joe, that I think are really important. 69% of women 18 to 29 and 55% of young men say that access to reproductive health care is important when choosing where to call home. And a majority say it's very important. When you add all of those things up, it is very clear that if you see any polls that show Trump winning with young people, MAGA Republicans winning with young people, you can just throw them out the window, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, this is the whole, it is, like you said, looking at the numbers under the hood. Sure, there may not be, there may be, I think there was one that looks like they've got enough signatures in Florida, for example, and there may be more initiatives. But okay, in a state that doesn't have an initiative process, there's no way that abortion will not, in the Dobbs decision, isn't going to be a big part of the debate in the presidential election. It's going to happen. It's not front of mind right now. It will be. The same with the economy. This is how it changes. Right now, that's not the focus. It will be. And when you look at these numbers, yes, even the number of where you talk about 2/3 of the younger voters say they're pro-choice, would describe themselves more pro-choice than twice as many as pro-choice as they would describe themselves as pro-life. That's pretty close to everybody. The numbers decline a little bit with age on that number, but not that much. So like whether it's 58, 38 or something like that, the majority of voters at post-Dobbs are coming down, on the pro-choice side of that issue. That will be an issue. It's 69% of women aged 18 to 29, 53% of young men, same thing. As you said, there's no way that won't be. First of all, once you know that fact, how lousy a campaign you have to run to not make sure that every single one of those women and young men know, that the danger that Trump having more judicial appointments beyond empowering, even more draconian state and national ban and the kinds of things that the MAGA cult wants. So that's going to be out there. That campaign will happen, and he is going to lose that campaign.
Trump's out there literally saying stuff like, For 54 years, they were trying to get Roe v. Wade terminated, and I did it.
Yeah.
And I'm proud to have done it. It was a miracle.
Yeah, because right
That's
now,
a 7-second ad right there.
Okay.
It's free.
Yeah.
Anybody can have it. Go use it.
Yeah, because right now he's trying to get DeSantis voters to come home. Anybody he's trying to like guard on his right from DeSantis so he can push her. This is that whole thing that the longer this kind of fight goes on, even people, if Nikki Haley beats him in New Hampshire and it only goes on another month until South Carolina and he's the nominee, that month there's a long time here where though these weaknesses get in wedge things start to get even a little bit more stark, and you start to bleed some voters, and that's what he's starting to worry about. That he first started out, as like trying to do basically trying to moderate. He went after DeSantis as as being too
attacking his, I think, his 6-week abortion ban.
Too far, too far. And so that's like you said, he's already backing off of that now. He's got to go the other way. As DeSantis was coming up, he starts to claim, no, I was the one, I appointed those 3 judges. I'm the one who got it done. And look, I don't care if he came out tomorrow and said he's for a compromise of 16 weeks, because that's, he's gone to doctors, he's talked to some women, he's decided that 16 weeks would be the right compromise. There is no one, first of all, the pro-life side says, what the?
Right, and they just go sit home.
And who would believe it? I mean, you appointed, you appointed the 3 judges that overturned that ruled on Dobbs, overturned Roe v. Wade, and we're gonna when you get in there, you'll do this really moderate. It's not going to work. I mean, that's what I'm saying. This is this is his. I agree with Brian. This is why, and I think Simon Rosenberg's been onto this too. This is why I've thought, in a 2-person race with Trump's ceiling being around 45, 46, maybe he could get to 46, but 45-ish, that Biden could get to 53. I mean, I know Simon wants to, try to get to 55, but I think 50.
I'd take 53 right now. Yep.
But the problem is the third parties. I mean, I think that's the biggest, so, now Brian will be, I don't want Brian to be coming back and saying, in our excellent episode this week, we did not talk enough about the third party threat, because it remains for me the number one threat to that might allow Trump back in.
Well, we've got more on that, which we'll save for a future show. But Joe, we can't end this show, even though we're running tight on time. When we get a message from Sally, who I'm referring to Sally Ford as this podcast godmother, which you can explain that. But
she is the godmother of this podcast.
When she writes, we listen. And her point was basically, and she sent us an email in all caps saying Trump is the incumbent Republican candidate, because the media keeps saying things like, and I think this was a Dan Ball's line, but she said, she pointed out his line saying, if Trump wins New Hampshire, he'll be the first non-incumbent Republican to carry the first 2 states on the calendar since the caucuses gained prominence in the 1970s. I think her point is, he's the incumbent. Do not talk about him like he's some underdog, whatever.
No,
this
and
is
it's
his
true.
party.
And this is why I said in the beginning on the Iowa results, when they're all saying, bragging about his margin, we have never had a former president of the United States contest the Iowa caucuses. Okay. We've never had a former president of the United States contest the New Hampshire primary or for the nomination, period. The closest thing we ever had to that on either side was former Vice President Walter Mondale. And so when you look at it, when you treat it that way, and you look at what his margin was in Iowa, I know I was in the state for him. It was 49-17. Well, it looks pretty damn close to 50-21 or 51-21. And by the way, the rest of the party had decided that, hey, we don't want the former vice president to be our nominee. I'm looking for someone else. They looked for people that had a lot of the same policies as him, people who were more conservative, more left, whatever. A lot like with Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. But in the end, those people who had voted against, basically voted in those primaries against Mondale, looking for somebody else, were the reason that later on Ronald Reagan won 49 states. And so I think that's the thing that everybody's been missing. Sally's right, and she is the godmother of this podcast. Her son Matt was one of the people who,
It's his
it was
idea.
his idea
Yeah.
for us to do the podcast, and he produces it with a lot of other good people he's pulled together, and we're grateful to that. And Mike Ford, Matt's father, who passed away several years ago, was my mentor for decades in the Kennedy and Mondale campaigns, and was there with Howard Dean and just about anything important I ever did. He taught me so much, and so it's just been a blast working with Matt, and it was so fun to see Sally weigh in with a question this week. So we love you guys, and hope to see you soon.
All right, Joe, that's a great place to end this week.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to That Trippy Show. This podcast will always be free with the support of our advertisers. It's part of Resolute Square. Check out the latest at resolutesquare.com/trippy. Please subscribe to That Trippy Show and leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. And you can always send us a question to thattrippyshow@gmail.com or leave us a question in the review on iTunes. We'll see you next week.
Resolute Square.